Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And it was great to speak to the earlier service as well. My name's Anna Lazslo, as you know, and I'm chair of the board of Tearfund. My own background, my professional background is in international development, so overseas aid. And I worked for many years with the government's overseas aid program in the Department for International Development, which has now been merged with the Foreign Office, so it's now the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. I no longer work with UK's development programme. I married a widower with 4 children. We've had 2 more children ourselves since then, and I live in Cheltenham, so that's sort of a little bit further away from some of the work and some of the places I've lived in before. But doing this work with Tearfund allows me to keep my feet in the water, and it allows me to see what God is doing around the world, even in these times where, as we were praying earlier, there's so many dark things going on and so much difficulty and hardship. We can see that God is at work, and it is terribly exciting. So I don't think I need to tell you who Tearfund is, but just in case there's anybody here who doesn't know about Tearfund, we are a Christian relief and development organisation, and we've been going now for 50 years, since 1968. Now, you as a church have been supporting Tearfund for over 40 years, and I know that since our records began, which is since then, actually, you've given nearly £31,000 towards our work. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for those. I know also some of you may be giving month by month as well, and just thank you for that too. Your generosity is making a real difference to those living in poverty around the world. Now, when I worked for the Department for International Development, we used to try and measure the difference that our work was making. We'd take a baseline survey at the beginning and we'd check at the end and see what difference we'd made. And if we got a difference of about 6%, we'd be fairly pleased with that. I think that's okay. That's good. If we got 9%, we'd be really quite proud. And if we got to, say, 12%, then that was just amazing. We'd say, we need to do an in-depth study on this. Have we looked at this? We need to start talking about this a bit more widely, perhaps do it in more countries. This is genuinely amazing. Now, I'm here to tell you today about something which Tearfund is doing, an approach which we're using, which blows these figures out of the water. We're talking about changes of 26%, 62%, 51%, 13%, 45% across every indicator that we look at. And this extraordinary, mind-blowing approach is the local church. Why should we be surprised? This is God's plan. This is the way that God has chosen to bring justice and to transform lives and to bring hope. If we look again at the Isaiah passage, it's God talking to his people. Is this not the kind of fasting I've chosen? To loose the chains of injustice, to break every yoke, to share your food with the hungry, provide the poor wanderer with shelter, when you see the naked, to clothe them. Do away with oppression, satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness. And in Matthew, Jesus said, you, is again talking to his people, his followers, the church, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others. God has called us to be salt and light and to be vessels of transformation, to herald the coming of the kingdom of God. So it shouldn't surprise us that when the church is let loose, we see astonishing change, and we see lives turned round and hope for the future and communities transformed. Now, we use in Tearfund, the approach which we're using is called Church and Community Transformation, or Transforming Communities. And what happens is that Tearfund, either directly or through a partner, works with the minister in the church and 1 or 2 people from the congregation to share our vision for what we believe God has in mind for his church, and to talk them through that and to train them in a series of Bible studies. And then that can be it. The congregation members and the pastors work through those Bible studies with the rest of the congregation. And this can take a few months to a couple of years, and it involves looking deeply into the Bible to see what God says about his purposes for his people, for his creation, for his church, about the relationships that he's set in place and that we have broken, and about his plans for restoration, about the calling to the church to be salt and light into the communities around us, and about the good gifts that he's given each one of us, however small, to use for his glory. And during that process, we see God changing mindsets showing people how much they are loved and what value he places on their lives, and releasing people from the prison of helplessness and dependency, and helping them to see that God has given them resources and he's given them agency. And the church begins to look outwards and to see the needs in the community around, to talk to others outside the church about the priorities they have and about what resources they already have and they can use to address those needs. And sometimes that's where you see a mindset change as well. So there's a point where we say, well, what have you got to address the needs? And they go, well, I haven't got anything. I mean, look at me. You look at this village. We're waiting for the government to come. We're waiting for this NGO to come. So, well, actually, what have you got? Have a look. Well, look, I've got nothing. I've got this small yard here. It's just full of stones. Okay. Well, we need a road, don't we? For that, we need stones. So we can use those stones. Have you got energy? We can use that energy. Might be a chicken. Have you got a chicken? Yes. Well, chickens provide eggs, don't they? Maybe those can be sold. We talk about that at this point in the Bible studies, looking at the story of the loaves and the fishes. So thousands of people really hungry, nothing to give them, but one small boy comes to have 2 loaves, 5 fish, or the other way around, I can never remember. And God uses that to feed 5,000 and more people. It could be that some additional technical support is needed, so perhaps to know how to lobby local government for their needs, or how to dig a well, or what kind of plants might do better there than the ones which they're using. And Tearfund might help there, or might put them in touch with somebody else who can. But what we usually find is at this point, the church with the community starts to fly. And roads are built with resources from the local people, from volunteer labor. Small savings groups are established, which allow their members to borrow and to invest in small businesses, maybe a chicken or 2 to start, or maybe a sewing machine. And once income starts to come in, the businesses can expand, they can maybe take on more employees, they can change. And gradually, health centers are established using funds saved and given by the community. Roads are built, communities are transformed, and churches start to grow too, as people see the difference that they're bringing. And pastors regularly tell us of that growth in faith and in numbers. Now, over the past couple of years, Tearfund has commissioned an external secular organization called State of Life to look at our work over 4 different countries, Rwanda, Tanzania, Sierra Leone, and Zimbabwe, and to see what change they found as a result of this work, because we could see stuff happening, but we wanted to be really sure and to be able to measure it. So State of Life interviewed almost 8,000 people across 400 communities, and they compared where this model, transforming communities, has been running against communities yet to begin this work. They looked at 23 measures across spiritual, personal, social, and economic spheres. And what they found confirmed what we've been seeing and hearing with our own eyes and with our own ears. Across every single one of those 23 indicators, the results were significantly higher for people living in communities where transforming communities work was happening compared to those where it was yet to start. People living in these communities are 27% more satisfied with their lives overall than those yet to take part in CCT, or transforming communities. So why is that? Well, let's look at these slides. I won't read them all out, but people living in these communities are 26% less likely to report that their family's gone without enough food in the last year. 13% less likely that they've gone without medicines. 26% less likely that their children haven't gone to school because they haven't been able to afford the school fees or the uniform or the books. 62% more likely to have invested in assets like property or livestock. 51% more likely to earn more or the same than last year. They're 113% more likely to have worked on a shared project with others. 45% more likely to think people will be there for them to help. They're 46% more likely to raise issues with the decision makers and 35% more likely to feel they actually have some influence. 22% more likely to help others in need outside their immediate families. 35% more likely to believe they will be better off in a year's time. So that's hope for the future. 26% more likely to feel confident that they could cope with unexpected events in the future. These are the kind of things that we see happening. This is whole life transformation. And I love a quote from a woman who'd been involved in one of these programs. She said she was so much better off than she had been before she started. But actually, it didn't matter if you took it all away tomorrow because she knew she could do this again. Now, that is resilience, and that is gold dust. Because what we all know is that actually in these communities, it is very possible that everything will be taken away from them tomorrow. By floods, by conflict, by being forced out of their homes. But we know that this leaves them better able to build back, far more likely to build back. I'm going to show you a short clip showing the impact of this program on one family in the Ivory Coast. It starts with the leader of the local church speaking. Oh, am I going to show it to you? Yeah.
The village itself was really in a bit of a difficult situation because there were no resources as such. People didn't realize what they had in the way of capacity, the potential, and the grace that the Lord had given them. They prayed, they fasted, but there was no concrete action. There were some who enthusiastically accepted their condition of poverty. So these are the challenges we are facing. And then, at one of the pastoral care meetings in 2018, I thank the Lord God who gave me the grace to attend this meeting. They gave the floor to Tearfund. Mr. Conan spoke, and he explained how CCT could help us. He explained the whole vision, and since then, CCT has been running in Zabagro.
My son will often get sick, and sometimes I fell ill too. My children are constantly unwell. Since we couldn't sell our farm products, we didn't have money for the children's medical bills.
Before, it was difficult to come up with enough money to pay for my children's school fees. But now I can afford to pay for all their fees. The CCT meetings have opened many doors for us. First, it has opened my spirit. It was there that I realized that I am not poor. I am rich and honorable person. All the doors are opened. In the past, I never thought of being successful despite my sufferings. I thought it was some kind of praising.
We used to make very little profit from our old way of farming. However, since switching to large-scale farming after receiving CCT training, we are now earning more than before. We've been able to turn our small farm industries into bigger ones. Thanks to CCT's guidance, we've been able to harvest more crops and make more money. We use some of the crops to meet our needs, and we sell the rest. Thanks to CCT, we have gained recognition in our village, and we have been able to construct a new house.
CCT taught us how to use our own resources to get what we want. It enlightens us about God's creation. God created everything for us. Everything is made to help us.
Your gifts, your prayers, everything you do, this all contributes and provides effective help. And the proof, everything you are able to see here, this life transformation. Our church and community transformation work is happening all over the world. We have an incredible vision to see 250,000 churches engaged with this training. Your support will help them reach the most vulnerable in their communities.
Thank you. I love the quote from that guy saying, I used to think I was poor, and now I know that I am rich and honorable person, and all the doors are opened. So that's the mindset change. Nothing around him has changed. But he realizes that he is loved, and he realizes that, as he said, God has made everything for us. And all the doors are opened. That is the extraordinary key of this, I think. And evidence suggests that the positive impacts of this program, encouraging people to take ownership of their own personal and community journey out of poverty, are really far-reaching. So what's extraordinary is that even people who haven't taken part in this training, in this program, are still 8 percentage points more likely to report higher economic, social, personal, or spiritual outcomes. And they're 18% more satisfied with their lives. And they haven't even done this. But they live in a community where others have. Now, State of Life, the people who did this study, had to run their numbers through again because they couldn't believe it. They had never seen this before. But we should not be surprised. This is God at work through his church. And why would we not see extraordinary change? Now, from a development perspective, we'd say, well, yeah, this is what happens. You have a local trusted organization, which is the church, working with its own community to identify their own needs and come up with their own solutions rather than relying on others. But even so, in my 2 decades of working in development, I have never seen results like this. Now, we've seen a video showing the impact of this work on one family, and I'm going to show you another video, which is actually an ad, to show the impact that this has on a whole community. And it's taken with a community in Burundi who'd gone through this process with their local church.
This is Burundi in Africa. And this is Cecile, who's walking to fetch water for her family. Oh, okay. Well, then what's in the bucket? This is the school that your donations built, brick by... Oh, then who built it? Of course. Your generous donation. Ah. This is the center of the community that your donations... No, look, it's not, is it? Okay, what did Tearfund do? Uh-huh.
Biciye mu ishengero Tearfund yarafashije guhugura wese.
Oh, well, that's much more helpful.
Nibaza ko yamaze kubitahura.
So for those of you who might not have been able to read the subtitles, basically at every point, when the narrator said, oh, this is what your donations have done, somebody in the community said, oh, no, no, this is what we've done. So what's Tearfund done? Tearfund trained the church who worked with the community to do this. So that's amazing. That is an actual real-life community. They made that film with the difference that they themselves have made with the help of the church trained by Tearfund. And that's what those figures that I quoted earlier look like in practice. And not only is this work transformative for churches and communities, it's actually really good value. It gives an incredible return on investment. The study found that £1 invested in CCT produces or releases £7 of community resources, including time and funds, donated by the community members, and leads to a value of £211. So £1 invested releases £7, leads to a value of £211. That is an extraordinary return. This is where we believe that God is calling Tearfund to invest increasingly over the coming years. And this is what we see as our distinct offering. We believe God has called us, as they said there, to work with 250,000 churches over the coming 7 to 10 years. Now, we clearly can't do that all ourselves. So what we're doing is we're going to work through the church, we're working with denominations, we're working with theological training colleges. It's not just Tearfund going around church by church by church, but a movement taking this forward. Now, what does this mean for Tearfund's other work? So work in crises, for example. Well, we'll still be there. We will still respond where we're present, but increasingly it might look like the church responding. So we'll work with churches to help them prepare for what may come and to be ready to respond when it does. And in fact, the desperate situation in East Africa, and in particular in Karamoja, which we prayed for earlier and to which you have so generously been responding, is being delivered alongside and through the church. And that's the immediate short term. And in the longer term, we are going to be doing this transforming communities work with them. Where a crisis is so significant that a lot more is needed, we will still come in ourselves with extra resources or direct support. And we will still ask for and use funding from governments or other institutions for complementary work in water and sanitation, maybe in livelihoods, in environmental engagement. But again, increasingly, this is going to be coming in, around, and sometimes working through our involvement with churches and their communities. At Tearfund, we believe that God has chosen his church to be vessels of transformation. And in Burundi, which we saw just now, this looks like the church mobilizing the community to build health centers, roads to them, to set up self-help groups, and even a new church building for the expanded church. And this is what transformation in that community looks like. And in fact, the bishop there came to us and said, "Thank you, Tearfund. Thank you very much. You've done your work. Please go." Now, that is really unusual to be asked to leave. But he said, "Please go and go there and there and there and there." Other churches nearby and other communities came and saw what was happening. Said, "What's this? Can we have some of this, please?" And Tearfund might go there, or indeed the churches might start to train themselves or train others in that. The local government offices came to us and said, or came to the church actually and said, "What's happening? I don't understand. I open my door in the morning. I don't have queues of people complaining about things or wanting things or saying there's huge arguments between them. Can we see what's happening?" When they found out what we were doing, they said, "Could we work with Tearfund, please? Can we set up a program where we work with you across the country in this area?" In South Sudan, this is what transformation looks like. So South Sudan is the poorest country in the world. Poverty and dependency are ingrained in the structure of the country and its governance, and even in the humanitarian system itself. And this year, over 60% of people in that country are going to need humanitarian assistance. Only 25% of primary school-aged children go to school. Far fewer, of course, go to secondary school. Now, this community has set up a primary school with nearly 400 children, another 200 in nursery, with teachers paid for by the community after going through CCT. Jennifer, who's a woman in one of those communities, testifies that previously she had no hope. But now, she said, "I discovered energy and potential through CCT." She came to faith. She set up a successful tailoring business. She has 6 children. She looks after 3 orphans. She sends them all to school. And she has a hope that all of them are going to go through university. Now, if that happens, then in one generation, that family has been lifted sustainably out of poverty. Or Beatrice in Burundi, who's illiterate, and before CCT training, she thought she was worthless. She joined a savings group, and her first loan was less than $5. She's now set up a shop in the village, and she's built her own home. That's our chief executive there, Nigel. Isaiah again, when you do these things, when you treat people fairly, when you feed the hungry, when you help the poor and destitute, then your light will break forth like the dawn. The glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. You'll be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. I've heard a description of villages who've used the transforming communities approach, described as oases. So Jennifer Sakala, who works for us in Zambia, says she's driven up through the north of Zambia, and it's like a wasteland. It's dry and no green around, and a few sort of hopeless clusters of huts. And then you come across greenery, and shrubs and crops, and people smiling and happy, and well-built houses or buildings. And this is what happens when CCT takes place and communities take control of their own future and start lifting themselves out of poverty. As the Matthew passage says, people don't light a lamp and put it under a bowl, but they put it on their stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. You can see the places where this is working. When the church heeds and responds to God's call, then the world around is transformed. And we are seeing the church respond across Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. We're seeing church leaders, as I've said, come to us and say, "Can we do this more? Can we train? Can we learn how to be trainers so we can train others as well?" Bishops want it to be extended into neighboring areas. And we are engaging with theological training colleges so that people could be trained in this right from the start of their ministry. We're working with the denominational leaders so that denominations can take this forward. We're seeing it picked up and taken forward again and again. And we are praying that God will work through his church across communities, across countries, and even across continents. Now, I want to leave you with an invitation and a challenge. The invitation has already been referred to. You've seen how people in the churches we work with start to think again about what God has given them and how they can use it to solve the problems they have. What has God given you? Now, as a church, you support Tearfund. Thank you so much. And thank you for all that you have given and for all that you will give today. And the collection today will go towards this work. And thanks to a couple of very good friends of Tearfund, anything which is given today, or indeed up to the 10th of August, is going to be doubled up to the up to the amount of £500,000. So please do think about what you'd like to give today. And for Tearfund, there is something wonderful about having a big church like yourselves supporting us. And so that is wonderful. Thank you. It means such a lot. I know that some of you also give generously month by month, and if you're interested in that as well, please not instead of this, but if you'd be interested in that as well, please come and talk to me afterwards, and I can help you with that. And again, any new direct debit set up before the 10th of August, the first 3 months will be doubled. There are also other ways to get involved. You might want to sign up on our website to receive our quarterly prayer diary or to join our monthly prayer Zoom meetings. There are lots of ways that you can do this. Please come and chat to me at the end if you're interested. And the challenge. So we started by reading from Isaiah about the extraordinary call from God to live their lives in a way that turns the world around. And I've referred to Matthew about God's call to be salt and light. And we've looked at what happens when churches around the world take this to heart and start to do that, and the extraordinary change that takes place around them. Now, we're in a different context here. We're not going to go out and build health centres or roads. But what would it look like if the church in the UK was a vessel of transformation? What would we see happening in the churches? What would we see happening in the communities around? And then again, what would we see happening in the churches again? Now, don't go away from here thinking that this is just for them. This is God's call to the church everywhere, to be transforming vessels for the world around. Is the church responding to God's call to it? Do we see him at work through the church into the lives of the community around? And if not, why not?